He was a powerful man, used to controlling everything and even fate. When illness threatened to take his daughter, the millionaire lost his footing. But what he never expected was that the maid, simple and devoted, would place herself between life and death, with an act of love so pure that it would change everything forever. If you enjoy emotional stories, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're listening from. Continuing. Chapter 1. The Scream in the Night. The Greenwich estate stood out in the New York night like an island of silence and privilege. Sumptuous mansions protected by high walls and sophisticated security systems housed the most influential families of America's financial capital. Among them, the house at number 278 belonged to Richard Miles, 43, owner of Miles Development, one of the largest construction companies in the country, a man known in business circles for his calculated coldness and ruthless strategic vision. On that warm February night, around 3 in the morning, the property's usual silence was violently torn apart by a sharp, desperate scream. "Richard, help!" Louisa Miles, 35, Richard's wife and nearly 9 months pregnant, had woken up in a panic. The contractions she was feeling were different from what the doctor had described in her prenatal appointments. The pain was excruciating, as if something was terribly wrong. Desperation took hold of her when she realized the Egyptian cotton sheets covering the bed were soaked not only with amniotic fluid, but also with blood, a lot of blood. "Richard," she tried to call again, but her voice was already failing. Her husband was not in the room. He had probably fallen asleep in his office, as often happened in the final weeks of her pregnancy, claiming he didn't want to disturb her rest. Downstairs, Joanna Fisher, 27, woke with a start in her room at the back of the mansion. She had been working as a housekeeper for the Miles family for 3 years, ever since she left Biloxi, Mississippi, in search of a better life in New York. Unlike the other staff who left at the end of their shifts, Joanna lived on the property, always available for any of the family's needs. The moment she heard the scream, her heart pounded. She knew that voice well. It was Mrs. Louisa, the only person in the house who treated her like a human being and not a silent shadow meant to remain invisible. Mrs. Louisa, the woman with the gentle smile who, even against her husband's wishes, would talk to Joanna about books, dreams, and the life growing inside her. Without a second thought, Joanna jumped out of bed. She quickly threw a robe over her simple nightgown and ran into the hallway. She found Marlene, the 60-year-old head housekeeper, standing in the middle of the main hall, hesitant. "Did you hear that?" Marlene asked, her eyes wide with fear. "I did." "It's Mrs. Louisa." "We shouldn't go up," the housekeeper replied, swallowing hard. Mr. Richard was very clear about the rules. No one goes to the upper floor after they've retired for the night. I'll call his cell phone. Joanna felt her blood boil in her veins. Richard Miles's rules were as rigid as iron. The couple's privacy was inviolable. The last maid who had disobeyed the rules had been fired that same day, without any explanation. But something inside her, a deep intuition, told her there was no time for formalities. "There's no time, Marlene," she exclaimed, already running towards the main staircase. She took the marble steps 2 at a time, ignoring the housekeeper's whispered calls. The upstairs hallway was long and dark, lit only by the faint glow from the emergency lights. Joanna knew the way to the master suite well. Cleaning that room was part of her daily tasks. As she approached the half-open door, she heard weak groans. She knocked softly. "Mrs. Louisa, are you all right?" There was no answer, just a muffled sob. Joanna pushed the door open, and the scene she saw froze her blood. Louisa was collapsed beside the bed in a pool of blood that was spreading across the Persian rug. Her face, normally radiant and flushed, was as pale as paper, her lips almost blue. Her hands clutched her prominent belly in desperation. "My God! Mrs. Louisa!" Joanna ran to her, kneeling in the blood without a care for her nightgown, which was now stained red. She held her employer's cold hand, which squeezed her fingers with surprising strength. "Helen," Louisa whispered, referring to the name she had chosen for her daughter. "Save my daughter, Joanna. Promise me you'll—" "Don't talk like that, Mrs. Louisa. You're going to be fine. You'll both be fine. So I'm going to call for help right now." Joanna grabbed the bedroom phone and dialed 911 with trembling hands. As she reported the situation in broken words, she heard the bedroom door being thrown open. Richard Miles stormed in, still dressed in the previous day's business attire. wrinkled from having fallen asleep sitting up. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he roared at Joanna, before his eyes fell on his collapsed wife. "Louisa!" The man who commanded hundreds of employees with the precision of a general lost all composure. He fell to his knees beside his wife, taking her into his arms gently as if she were made of glass. His face, normally impenetrable, was now a mask of terror. "The ambulance will take at least 20 minutes, Joanna informed him, still holding the phone. "The baby!" "I don't think we have time." For a second, Richard looked at Joanna as if she were a stranger, as if he had completely forgotten her existence. Then something in his gaze shifted. "You," he said in a tone that allowed no argument, "get clean blankets and sterilized scissors from the bathroom closet. And wake up the driver. We're taking her in my car." Joanna obeyed immediately, rushing to carry out the orders. Within minutes, she had prepared the back seat of the black Audi A8 with soft blankets. George, the driver who lived in a small house at the back of the property, was already at the wheel, ready to go. The face of Richard's trusted man was serious, but his eyes betrayed the fear he felt. With extreme care, Richard carried Louisa down the stairs. The woman could barely keep her eyes open, murmuring incoherent words. A trail of blood marked the path they took. Marlene, the housekeeper, was frozen in the hall, her hands covering her mouth in shock. "I'm coming with you," Joanna said, following Richard to the car. "No, you stay," he answered curtly, as he settled Louisa in the back seat. "But, sir, she might need—" "I said you stay!" Richard's shout echoed through the garage. Joanna took a step back but didn't give up. "Forgive me, sir, but Mrs. Louisa asked me—" She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "She asked me to help take care of your daughter. I promised I would." Something in Joanna's tone of voice must have penetrated the barrier of panic surrounding Richard. He glanced quickly at his unconscious wife, and then at the maid who, inexplicably, seemed to be the only person keeping calm in the chaos. "Get in," he finally ordered, closing the door after Joanna slid into the seat next to Louisa. "Mount Sinai Hospital. As fast as you can, George." The car sped off into the night, cutting through the deserted New York streets with frightening speed. In the back seat, Joanna held Louisa's head in her lap, whispering words of encouragement. Her employer opened her eyes once, fixing them on Joanna's with a disturbing intensity. "Tell him," she whispered with difficulty. "Tell Richard that the letter, in the bottom of the jewelry drawer, I promise, Mrs. Louisa. But you'll be able to tell him yourself, you'll see. Hold on, we're almost there. Mount Sinai, one of the most sophisticated hospitals in the United States, already had a team waiting at the emergency entrance. Alerted by a desperate call from Richard during the drive. The Miles' name opened doors even in the middle of the night. In seconds, Louisa was transferred to a gurney and rushed to the operating room, while doctors shouted orders and nurses ran with bags of blood and equipment. Richard followed the team to the double doors that separated the hallway from the surgical area. There, a middle-aged doctor with a grave expression stopped him from going further. "Mr. Miles, I need you to wait here. We're going to do everything we can." "Save them both, Doctor." Richard's voice was almost a plea, unrecognizable to those who only knew the ruthless businessman. "No matter the cost, save my wife and my daughter." The doctor nodded seriously and disappeared through the doors. Richard stood there staring into space, like a statue made of anguish. Joanna, a few steps behind, didn't know what to do. She was just the maid, after all. She had no place in such an intimate and painful moment. She started to move away towards the waiting room when Richard's voice stopped her. "Stay." It was a single word, spoken without looking at her, but it carried the weight of a command. Joanna stopped and stood there at a respectful distance as the minutes dragged on like hours. The wait was torture. Richard paced back and forth like a caged animal, occasionally stopping to press his forehead against the cold hospital wall, his eyes shut tight. Joanna remained silent, praying quietly to a God she wasn't even sure she believed in anymore. After almost an hour, the doors opened again. The same doctor came out, now holding her surgical cap, her face etched with an expression Joanna recognized immediately. It was the look of someone bearing news that would change lives forever. "Mr. Miles." Richard approached like a sleepwalker, his eyes fixed on the doctor's face, desperately searching for a sign of hope. "We were able to perform an emergency delivery. Your daughter was born alive, but she is extremely premature and has serious complications. She was taken immediately to the neonatal ICU. And my wife, Richard's voice came out strangled, almost inaudible. The doctor lowered her eyes for a moment, a gesture that said everything before the words were even spoken. I'm so sorry. Mr. Miles, we did everything we could, but your wife suffered a massive hemorrhage. The placental abruption was... She paused, realizing technical details didn't matter at that moment. Your wife didn't make it. The world seemed to freeze. Joanna saw the exact moment something broke inside Richard Miles. It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a scream. It was more as if a light had been extinguished, as if the man before her had instantly aged decades. I want to see her, he said, with a frightening calm. Of course, the doctor replied. This way. Richard followed the doctor like an automaton without looking back. Joanna stood frozen in the hallway, feeling hot tears stream down her face. Louisa, the sweet woman who sang to her belly every night, who showed Joanna the little clothes she'd bought for the baby, who spoke of the dreams she had for her daughter. Louisa was gone. As she tried to process the loss, Joanna remembered the promise she had made. Save my daughter, Louisa had pleaded. Little Helen was still alive, fighting somewhere in that gigantic hospital. With hesitant steps, Joanna approached the information desk and, gathering all her courage, asked, Mr. Richard Miles's daughter, the baby who was just born, could I find out how she is? The receptionist looked at her with suspicion, sizing up her simple clothes and tear-streaked face. Are you family? Joanna hesitated. I work for the family. The child's mother asked me to... I'm sorry, but we can only provide information to immediate family members. Joanna was about to insist when she heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. A different younger doctor, wearing a lab coat that indicated he was from the neonatal team, was approaching the desk quickly. Where is the father of the newborn Miles baby? We need his authorization for emergency procedures. The receptionist pointed in the direction Richard had gone with the first doctor. The young doctor seemed agitated, worried. Is it about baby Helen? Joanna dared to ask. Is she okay? The doctor glanced quickly at Joanna, likely reaching the same conclusion as the receptionist about her status. Are you a relative? Joanna swallowed hard before telling a lie she knew was necessary. I'm the child's aunt, Louisa's sister. The exhaustion and urgency of the moment must have prevented the doctor from questioning the truth of her statement. He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. The situation is critical. The baby weighs less than 4 pounds, is in severe respiratory distress, and is showing signs of internal bleeding. We're doing everything we can, but... He hesitated, choosing his words. The chances are very slim. Less than 2%, to be honest. Joanna's heart tightened. 2%. It was almost nothing. It was a sentence. Can I see her? She asked, her voice choked with emotion. The doctor seemed to consider the request for a moment. Follow me. It might be better for you to be there when we speak to the father. The loss of his wife and now this, he's going to need family support. Joanna followed the doctor through the sterile corridors, feeling like an imposter, but determined to fulfill her promise to Louisa. When they reached the neonatal ICU, the doctor had her put on a sterile gown, cap and mask before entering. What Joanna saw broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. In an incubator surrounded by machines and monitors lay the smallest creature she had ever seen. Helen was minuscule, her transparent skin revealing bluish veins. Tubes and wires seemed larger than her fragile body. The artificial light of the ICU gave the scene an unreal quality, as if that life was suspended between two worlds. She's fighting, the doctor said beside her. But I have to be honest, the next few days, perhaps hours, will be decisive. Joanna moved closer to the incubator, placing her hand on the clear plastic that separated her from Louisa's daughter. Fight, little Helen, she whispered. Your mother asked me to take care of you, and I will. I promise. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Richard, accompanied by the doctor who had delivered the news about Louisa. The man's face was unrecognizable. There were no tears, but his eyes were empty, like the windows of an abandoned house. The neonatal doctor approached him immediately, speaking in a low, urgent voice about the baby's critical condition and the necessary procedures. Joanna watched the scene from a distance, trying to decipher Richard's expression. Finally, the businessman looked at the incubator where his daughter was fighting to survive. Something strange happened then. Instead of moving closer, he took a step back. Then another. "Mr. Miles," the doctor called, confused. "We need your authorization for—" "Do whatever is necessary." Richard's voice came out mechanical, distant. "But I don't want to see her." A shocked silence filled the room. The doctor exchanged perplexed glances with his colleague. "Sir, I understand this is an extremely difficult time, but your daughter, she killed my wife." The words fell like stones in the small space of the ICU. Joanna felt as if she'd been slapped. The doctor seemed equally stunned. "Mr. Miles, what happened was an obstetric complication. Your daughter didn't—" "I don't want to see her," Richard repeated, each word laced with a coldness that made Joanna tremble. "Ever, do you understand? Do whatever you want. But I don't want to hear about her, I don't want to know. Just handle it." Without waiting for a reply, Richard turned and walked out of the ICU. Joanna, paralyzed by shock, met the doctor's gazes. The older woman sighed deeply. "The trauma of the loss," she murmured. "He's not thinking clearly." "Regardless of his emotional state, I have a patient to save," the neonatologist replied, visibly disturbed. And without the father's formal authorization for more invasive procedures. It was then that Joanna made the decision that would forever change the course of her life. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and looked at the two doctors with a determination that surprised even herself. "I'll take care of her," she declared. "I'll take responsibility. I'll do whatever it takes." "Ma'am," the doctor began, uncertain. "I'm not her biological aunt," Joanna confessed, deciding it was time for the truth. "I'm the family's housekeeper. But her mother, before she passed, made me promise I would take care of her daughter. And that's what I'm going to do." The silence that followed was heavy. The doctors exchanged meaningful looks. "Unfortunately, without the authorization of a family member or legal guardian," the neonatologist began. "Then tell me what she needs." Joanna interrupted, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to fall. "Tell me what I can do for her, what I can get. There must be a way." The older doctor observed Joanna for a long moment before speaking. "There's a specialist," she said in a low voice, as if afraid of being overheard. "A retired neonatologist. She works with alternative methods for extreme cases like this, methods that the hospital doesn't officially endorse." "Where can I find her?" Joanna asked immediately. The doctor hesitated, looking at her younger colleague, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'll give you her contact information," she said finally. "But this stays between us." At that moment, looking at the tiny human being fighting for her life in the incubator, Joanna knew she was about to cross a line of no return. For Louisa, for Helen, for a promise made in the desperation of the night, she was willing to risk everything. "What this baby needs," she said with a conviction that came from the depths of her soul, "is someone to fight for her. And that someone is me." And as the cold hospital light illuminated the first dawn without Louisa Miles in the world, an unlikely warrior prepared for a battle no one believed could be won. A housekeeper from Biloxi, against all medical and social odds, decided she would save the life of the rejected heiress of the most influential family in Greenwich. And nothing and no one would stop her. Chapter 2. Against All Odds. The morning light seeped timidly through the hospital blinds as Joanna left the neonatal ICU. Her legs felt like cotton, the physical exhaustion mingling with the emotional turmoil of the past few hours. In the pocket of the robe she still wore over her now wrinkled and stained nightgown was a small piece of paper with a handwritten phone number. It was her only hope. In the hallway she found Richard sitting in a plastic chair staring into space. The man who commanded an empire seemed to have become an empty shell. Joanna hesitated, but she knew she had to speak with him. She approached slowly, like one would approach a wounded animal. "Mr. Miles." He raised his eyes slowly, as if the simple act of focusing his gaze required a superhuman effort. For a moment he seemed not to recognize her. "Helen, your daughter," Joanna began, choosing each word carefully. "She needs special treatments, expensive medications." "I already told you I don't want to hear about it." The coldness in his voice made Joanna flinch, but she held her ground. "Your wife asked me to take care of her, sir. It was her last request." Richard stood up abruptly, his eyes now filled with a contained fury. "Don't you dare speak of her. You don't have the right." "I'm sorry, sir, but I need—" "What do you need?" he interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "Money, is that it? You want to take advantage of this situation?" Joanna recoiled as if she'd been slapped, but quickly composed herself. This was no time for wounded pride. "Yes, sir. I need money," she answered with raw honesty. "Not for me, but to save your daughter. The doctors said the chances are minimal, but there's a specialist who might be able to help. And I promised your wife that—" "Enough!" His voice echoed down the empty hallway, causing a nurse at a nearby station to look in their direction with disapproval. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as if trying to regain control. When he spoke again, his voice was once again cold and distant. "How much?" Joanna blinked, confused. "How much? What? How much money do you need?" he asked, pulling his phone from his pocket and opening his banking app. I don't know for sure," Joanna admitted. "The treatments, the medications." Richard typed something on his phone and then held out a platinum credit card to her. "Take it. The PIN is 2702, he said, referring to Louisa's birthday. "It has a daily limit of $100,000. Use whatever is necessary. But be very clear about one thing. I don't want to hear another word about this, about the child. Ever again. What you do or don't do is your problem." "Understood." Joanna took the card with trembling hands, its weight feeling as if it were made of lead. "I understand, sir." "Good. Now I need to go. Handle the arrangements for—" He couldn't finish the sentence, referring to Louisa's funeral. "Mr. Miles," Joanna called as he was already walking away. "Mrs. Louisa mentioned a letter. She said it was in the bottom of her jewelry drawer." Richard stopped for a moment, his back to her, his shoulders tense. Without a word, he continued walking until he disappeared at the end of the hall, carrying the invisible weight of his grief. Joanna looked at the card in her hand. It represented more money than she had ever touched in her life. It also represented an overwhelming responsibility. With a deep sigh, she took out the phone she kept for communication with the other staff at the mansion and dialed the number written on the paper. After 3 rings, a deep, cautious female voice answered. "Who is this?" "My name is Joanna Fisher. Dr. Elise from Mount Sinai Hospital gave me this number. It's about a newborn in critical condition." There was a brief silence on the line before the reply. "Come to 1245 Park Avenue, apartment 702. Come alone. And bring the child's medical records if possible." The line went dead before Joanna could respond. She put her phone away, feeling her heart race. She was about to enter unknown, possibly dangerous territory, but she had no choice. She had made a promise. A taxi dropped Joanna off in front of an elegant building on the Upper East Side, one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods. The doorman, after a quick call to confirm her visit, allowed her to enter. On the 7th floor, the door to apartment 702 opened before she even rang the bell. "Come in, quickly," said the woman who greeted her. Dr. Regina Scott was around 70 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and incredibly lively eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. The apartment was spacious and impeccably organized, with decor that blended modern elements with Oriental antiques. One wall was completely covered with medical books. "Sit down," the woman instructed, pointing to a beige leather sofa, "and tell me everything. Don't leave anything out." For the next 20 minutes, Joanna recounted the events of that tragic night. Dr. Scott listened intently, making occasional notes on a notepad. "And you said you have the necessary financial resources?" the doctor asked when Joanna finished her story. "Yes," she replied, showing the card Richard had given her. "The father. He doesn't want anything to do with the child, but he gave me access to money to handle the problem." The last phrase came out bitterly. Regina nodded slowly, as if pondering something very serious. "Do you understand what you're doing, child?" she finally asked, fixing her piercing eyes on Joanna's. "You are taking responsibility for a life that, according to conventional medicine, has a minimal chance of survival." "I understand, doctor." "And do you also understand that the methods I may use are not approved by the American Medical Association? That we will be operating in a legal gray area?" Joanna swallowed hard before answering. "What I understand, doctor, is that without your help that baby will die. And I made a promise to her mother. A small smile appeared on Regina's thin lips. It's been a long time since I've seen such determination in someone so young, she commented. Very well, I will help you, but we need to act quickly. I will need some specific equipment, medications that are not easily found, and a trusted nurse. And we will need a safe place away from prying eyes. The Miles mansion has a guest wing that's completely separate from the main house, Joanna suggested. And Mr. Miles is rarely home. He spends most of his time at the office or on business trips. Regina considered the proposal for a moment. It could work, but we need the child's hospital discharge. The hospital won't release her easily in her current state. Mr. Miles can authorize it, Joanna said. He just wants to be rid of the problem. The words came out with more bitterness than she intended, but Regina just nodded, understanding. Then that's what we'll do. I will gather what we need while you get the authorization. We'll meet at the hospital in... She checked her watch. 3 hours. Is that enough time? Yes, doctor. And thank you. Regina waved off the thanks. Don't thank me yet, child. What we are about to do is a war against nature itself. And wars have casualties. The return to the hospital was even more tense. Joanna found Richard in the administrative wing, filling out forms for the release of Louisa's body. His eyes were red but dry, as if there were no more tears to shed. I need your signature to discharge the baby, Joanna said bluntly. Knowing that any mention of Helen's name would be met with hostility, Richard looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Would the doctors allow that? Vater, they will if you sign a liability waiver. Just say you wish to transfer her to home care with specialized medical assistance. The man laughed without humor. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I'm just fulfilling my promise to your wife, Joanna replied, keeping her voice steady. Richard turned his eyes back to the papers in front of him. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with a calculated coldness. You know she's going to die, don't you? The doctors were clear about the odds. Maybe, Joanna admitted, but not without me trying everything possible. Richard studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand her motivation. Finally, he sighed. What do you need me to sign? Joanna handed him the forms that Dr. Scott had prepared over the phone. Richard signed them without reading, like someone signing a death warrant. When he finished, he stared at Joanna. When this is all over, as it inevitably will be, you will return to your duties in the house. None of this will be mentioned again. Understood? Joanna nodded, knowing this was not the time to argue. The important thing now was to get Helen out of the hospital and start the treatment with Dr. Scott. With the signed documents, the discharge process was surprisingly fast. The hospital doctors obviously disagreed with the decision, but they couldn't oppose the expressed will of the father and legal guardian. Within a few hours, a private ambulance, hired by Dr. Scott, was transporting the fragile Helen Miles to the Greenwich mansion, equipped with monitoring devices, oxygen and medications. The guest wing, separated from the main house by a long corridor and an inner courtyard, was quickly transformed into a mini NICU. Regina had mobilized equipment and a trusted nurse, Anna, who would work in alternating shifts with Joanna. Every second is precious now, Regina explained as she adjusted the makeshift incubator where Helen rested. We will begin a treatment that combines conventional techniques with alternative methods I developed during my years in the Appalachian region, working with rural and indigenous communities. Joanna watched every move the doctor made, determined to learn everything she could. It's a holistic approach, Regina continued. In addition to traditional medications to strengthen the lungs and heart, we will use botanical extracts that help stabilize the immune system and reduce internal inflammation. Specific herbal steam for the respiratory tract and special tactile stimulation techniques to strengthen the child's physical bond with her environment. And this works? Joanna asked, unable to hide the doubt in her voice. Regina smiled faintly. I've saved dozens of children considered lost causes by traditional medicine. But every case is unique, and this one is particularly challenging. She adjusted one of the monitors before continuing. What I can guarantee is that if this child has the slightest chance of surviving, we will find it. The first 24 hours were the most critical. Helen had 2 respiratory arrests, reversed only by Regina's quick intervention. The doctor practically moved into the guest wing, sleeping only in brief naps on the sofa near the incubator. Joanna never left the baby's side for a minute, except to use the bathroom. She watched every movement of the tiny chest, every fluctuation on the monitors, quickly learning to interpret the signs. Sometimes when Regina allowed, she would put her hand inside the incubator and gently touch Helen's translucent skin, whispering words of encouragement. "Fight. Little Helen, your mother is watching over you, and I'm here. I won't leave you alone." On the morning of the second day, while Regina was applying a vaporized mixture of medicinal herbs into the environment around the incubator, Helen opened her eyes for the first time. They were blue like Louise's. Joanna felt tears stream down her face as she saw that small sign of life. She opened her eyes. "Doctor, that's good, isn't it?" Regina nodded, allowing herself a brief smile. "It's a positive sign, but we still have a long way to go. The next few days will be decisive." On the third day, there was a significant breakthrough. Helen began to accept small amounts of donated breast milk, obtained by Regina through her network of contacts. Her oxygenation levels were more stable, and the doctor slightly reduced the oxygen concentration in the incubator. "She's a warrior," commented Anna, the nurse, while checking the baby's vital signs. "I've never seen a preemie this small fight with such determination." "She has someone to fight for," Joanna replied, thinking of Louisa. On the fourth day, as Regina was performing one of the tactile stimulation procedures, something extraordinary happened. Helen grasped the doctor's finger with her tiny hand. It was a weak, almost imperceptible grip, but for those who knew the critical state the child had arrived in, it was nothing short of a miracle. "Look at this," Regina exclaimed, her usual professional composure momentarily forgotten. "She's responding to touch." Joanna approached, amazed, and when it was her turn to put her finger in the incubator, she felt the same delicate grip. The emotion was so overwhelming that she had to sit down. "She's going to survive, isn't she, Doctor?" she asked, her voice choked. Regina, always cautious, allowed herself a moment of optimism. If she continues like this, her chances are improving with every hour. But we won't let our guard down. There are still significant risks. The following days established an exhausting but hopeful routine. Joanna divided her time between caring for Helen, learning nursing techniques from Anna, and her minimal duties in the main house, just enough to keep up appearances. Richard did not return home that week. According to Marlene, the head housekeeper, he was staying at his condo in Midtown near the company's office. Louisa's funeral had been a private ceremony with only close family. Joanna was not invited. On the 10th day, when Helen was already showing consistent signs of improvement, the universe Joanna had carefully built around the child was abruptly invaded. Carmen Miles, Richard's older sister, arrived at the mansion unannounced, demanding to see the child. Carmen was the opposite of her brother in appearance, but identical in determination. At 47, she had never married, dedicating her life to the family business, especially the public relations and image side. Tall, thin, always impeccably dressed and made up, she was known in New York's social circles for her sharp tongue and relentless ambition. "Where is the child?" she demanded as soon as she entered the house, addressing Marlene. The housekeeper, caught off guard and intimidated by Carmen's imposing presence, hesitated for only a second before answering. "In the guest wing, ma'am. But Mr. Richard gave orders that no one—" "My brother is in no condition to give orders about anything right now," Carmen cut in, already heading down the corridor that led to the separate wing. "He's shattered by the loss of his wife. I am taking over family matters temporarily." Joanna was alone with Helen when she heard the determined footsteps in the hallway. Anna had gone out to get more medical supplies, and Regina was resting in one of the rooms after a full night of monitoring the baby during a sudden fever. The door opened without warning, and Carmen Miles swept in like a gust of wind, her strong perfume invading the sterile environment. Her eyes scanned the room-turned ICU before landing on Joanna, who was standing beside the incubator. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice as sharp as ice. Joanna stood up, feeling a protective instinct ignite within her. "I'm Joanna Fisher, ma'am." "I work for the family." Carmen narrowed her eyes, appraising Joanna from head to toe. "You're the maid. What are you doing in here? Where are the doctors?" Before Joanna could answer, Regina entered the room, alerted by the sound of voices. "May I help you, ma'am?" the doctor asked, her professional posture masking the evident tension in her eyes. Dr. Regina Scott. She introduced herself, extending her hand. Carmen ignored the greeting, approaching the incubator to examine Helen. Her calculating eyes studied the child as one would appraise merchandise. "This is Richard's daughter?" she asked, more to herself than to the others. "She's smaller than I expected." "She was born prematurely and in critical condition," Regina explained, subtly positioning herself between Carmen and the incubator. "But she is responding well to treatment." Carmen turned her attention to the doctor. "And what treatment would that be exactly? Why isn't she in a proper hospital?" Her tone made her disapproval clear. "It was Mr. Richards' decision," Joanna answered, gathering her courage. "He signed the documents authorizing specialized home treatment." The look Carmen gave, Joanna, was glacial. "My brother is not in a psychological state to make decisions about the heiress of the Miles family," she declared. "Losing Louisa destroyed him. That's why I'm here, to ensure the family's interests are protected." Something in the way she said family's interests sent a chill down Joanna's spine. Regina also seemed to sense the veiled threat, as her posture became even more protective. "The child is progressing well under our care," the doctor stated with authority. "Moving her now would be an unnecessary risk." Carmen smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand your concern, doctor, but I assure you, I will arrange for the best specialist to care for my niece. After all, she is a Miles," she paused before adding, "and the heiress to a considerable fortune now that Louisa is gone." There it was, Joanna thought. The real reason for Carmen's sudden interest. It wasn't the child herself, but what she represented: money, influence, power. "Ma'am," Joanna began. Unable to contain herself, Mrs. Louisa specifically asked that I take care of Helen. It was her last wish. The look Carmen shot Joanna was one of pure disdain. "A housekeeper taking care of the Miles heiress? That's ridiculous." She turned back to Regina. "And what about you, doctor? What is your specialty exactly? Which hospital do you work for?" Regina maintained her composure in the face of the hostile interrogation. "I am a retired neonatologist with over 40 years of experience. I worked at Mount Sinai and Johns Hopkins before dedicating myself to independent research." "Independent research?" Carmen repeated, the skepticism evident in her voice. "Interesting. I'll be checking your credentials, if you don't mind." "Not at all," Regina replied calmly, though Joanna could see the tension in her eyes. Carmen looked one more time at Helen, who was sleeping peacefully in the incubator, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. "Well, I won't take up any more of your time for now," she said, adjusting the strap of her Hermes bag on her shoulder, "but I will be back tomorrow with my lawyer. There are legal matters to be resolved regarding the child's custody." With those words, she headed for the door. Before leaving, she cast one last look at Joanna. "Your name is Joanna Fisher, correct?" "I'll remember that." The veiled threat hung in the air even after Carmen had left. Regina and Joanna looked at each other, both understanding the gravity of the situation. "She's going to come back," Joanna said, her voice trembling. "And she's going to take Helen." Regina nodded grimly. "And when she finds out about my unconventional methods, she'll probably try to have my medical license revoked. What little is left of it." "What can we do?" Joanna asked, feeling desperation grow inside her. "We need to talk to Richard," Regina replied after a moment of reflection. "He's the father. His word still carries legal weight." Joanna shook her head, skeptical. "He doesn't even want to hear his daughter's name." "I doubt he'll intercede for her." "We have to try anyway," Regina insisted. "It's our only chance." That night, while Helen slept peacefully, unaware of the storms gathering around her, Joanna made a decision. If Richard wouldn't defend his own daughter, she would have to find another way to protect her. It was then that she remembered Louisa's last words. The letter in the jewelry drawer. It was her last hope, and she was willing to risk everything to get it. When Anna arrived for the night shift, Joanna explained the situation and asked her to be vigilant for any strange movements. Then, gathering all her courage, she went to the main house, to the room that had belonged to Richard and Louisa. The room was exactly as it had been on that fateful night, except for the rug which had been removed. Louisa's clothes were still in the closet, her personal belongings untouched on the vanity. The air still carried a faint trace of her perfume. With her heart aching with sadness and fear of being discovered, Joanna went to the dresser where Louisa kept her jewelry. She opened the main drawer and searched the bottom, among the velvet boxes. For a moment she feared the letter didn't exist, that it had been just the delirium of a dying woman. But then her fingers touched a thick paper envelope, hidden beneath a box of pearl earrings. It was white, simple, sealed with wax, and had a name written on the front in the elegant handwriting Joanna immediately recognized, "For Richard if something goes wrong." Joanna carefully removed the envelope, as if it were a sacred relic. She knew she was violating the couple's privacy, but she also knew that this letter could be Helen's only salvation. She left the room silently, the envelope held securely against her chest. Now all she needed was the courage to do what no one else would: confront Richard Miles and remind him of the man he had been before grief turned him into a shadow of himself. With the letter in hand and the future of an innocent child at stake, Joanna left the mansion in the dead of night, determined to find the man who could change Helen's destiny with a single word. And as the taxi cut through the illuminated streets of New York toward Richard's condo in Midtown, she prayed that the words of a woman loved beyond death could awaken the love that lay dormant in a man's broken heart. Chapter 3. Louisa's Letter. The night was late when the taxi dropped Joanna off in front of one of the most exclusive buildings on Fifth Avenue. The Platinum Tower, with its glass facade reflecting the lights of the metropolis, housed some of the most expensive apartments in New York. Richard Miles occupied the duplex penthouse, a space he rarely used before the tragedy, preferring the Greenwich mansion he shared with Louisa. Now, as Marlene had confided, he took refuge there, immersed in work and isolation. Joanna stood before the main entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. The envelope felt as heavy as lead in her hands. For a moment she considered giving up. Who was she to be here, a simple housekeeper, confronting one of the most powerful men in the city on his own turf? But then she thought of Helen, so fragile and fighting for her life, and the promise she had made to Louisa. She took a deep breath and approached the doorman's booth. "Good evening. I need to speak with Mr. Richard Miles. It's urgent." The doorman, a middle-aged man with an impassive expression, looked her up and down. His gaze quickly assessed Joanna's simple clothes, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, the dark circles under her eyes from days without proper sleep. "Mr. Miles is not receiving visitors," he replied curtly, already turning back to his post. "Please," Joanna insisted, her voice firm despite her nervousness. "Tell him it's Joanna from the Greenwich house. It's about his wife, about Louisa." Mentioning Louisa's name was like speaking a magic password. The doorman hesitated, studied Joanna's face for another moment, and then gave a brief nod. "Wait here." He made a quick call, speaking in a low voice. Joanna couldn't hear what he was saying, but from the quick glances in her direction, she knew she was being described. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, the doorman hung up and turned back to her. 18th floor penthouse. He'll see you for 5 minutes. The private elevator to the penthouse was mirrored and silent, so different from the small, noisy service elevator Joanna used at the mansion. During the ascent, she mentally rehearsed what she would say, how she would broach the subject. But all the carefully prepared words evaporated when the doors opened directly into the apartment's entrance hall. Richard Miles was standing there, waiting for her. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, without a tie. Unusual for a man Joanna had always seen impeccably dressed. His eyes were bloodshot, his face shadowed by several days of stubble. On the elegant living room's coffee table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a used glass testified to how he had been spending his nights. "What do you want?" he asked without preamble, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't used it in a long time. Joanna took a step forward, clutching the envelope to her chest. "I need to talk about Helen." "Sir?" His expression hardened immediately. "I already told you I don't want—" "Your sister was at the mansion today," Joanna interrupted, knowing it might be her only chance. "She plans to take custody of Helen. She said you're not in a psychological state to make decisions, and that she's going to take the matter to court." For a brief instant, something like surprise crossed Richard's face. Then he shrugged with a studied indifference. "So? Maybe she's right. I'm in no condition to take care of that child." Your sister isn't interested in Helen, Joanna insisted, taking another step forward. She's only interested in what Helen represents. The inheritance, the family's public image. Richard laughed, a bitter, joyless sound. You don't know my sister. I know enough, Joanna replied, surprising herself with her own boldness. I saw how she looked at Helen, as if she were appraising an asset, not a child. I heard how she spoke about the Miles heiress. She has no love for that baby, Mr. Miles. She has interests. Richard walked to the window, turning his back to Joanna. The city glittered below, millions of lights dotting the darkness. You said you had 5 minutes. 2 have already passed, and so far you've only spoken ill of my sister. What did you really come here for? Joanna took a deep breath. It was now or never. Your wife, Mrs. Louisa, she left something for you. Slowly, Richard turned, his eyes fixed on the envelope Joanna was now holding out to him. What is it? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. A letter. She hid it in her jewelry drawer. She asked me to give it to you in case something happened. Richard didn't move to take the envelope. He stood motionless, as if turned to stone. Did you read it? He finally asked. No, sir. It wasn't for me. After what seemed like an eternity, Richard reached out and took the envelope. His fingers trembled slightly as he examined the handwriting on the thick paper. He traced the letters with his fingertips, as if he could feel Louisa's presence through those strokes of ink. You can go now, he said, without looking up from the envelope. Joanna hesitated. This wasn't how she had imagined the scene. She needed to be sure he would actually read the letter, that he would understand what was at stake. Mr. Miles, please, Helen needs... I said you can go, he repeated, his tone making it clear it was not a request, but an order. Joanna felt tears of frustration welling up. She had risked so much to get here, and now she had to leave without any guarantee that her efforts would make a difference. But she knew that insisting would be worse. With a heavy heart, she turned toward the elevator. Before the doors closed, she cast one last look at Richard. He was still standing in the same spot, the envelope held tight in his hands, his gaze lost on some invisible point on the city's horizon. She's getting better every day, Joanna said softly. Your daughter. She's strong like her mother. The elevator doors closed before she could see any reaction to her words. The return to the mansion was a fog of worry and uncertainty. Joanna didn't know if she had done the right thing, if Louisa's letter would have any effect on Richard's hardened heart. All she could do was go back to Helen and continue to fight for her. The house was quiet when she arrived. She went straight to the guest wing, where she found Anna monitoring the baby's vital signs. How is she? She asked, approaching the incubator. Stable, the nurse replied with a small smile. Actually, better than stable. Dr. Scott reduced the oxygen concentration again. She's breathing more and more on her own. Joanna felt a wave of relief wash over her exhausted body. And Mr. Miles's sister? Did she come back? No sign of her. But Dr. Scott is worried. She thinks we need to be prepared for anything. Joanna nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. If Carmen really managed to get a court order to take custody of Helen, not all the determination in the world would be enough to keep her safe. Where's the doctor? She went to rest for a bit. She was up all night monitoring the little one's fever. Joanna approached the incubator and looked at Helen. The baby seemed stronger, less fragile. Her skin was beginning to gain a healthier color, and her movements, though still limited, seemed more vigorous. Hello, little warrior, Joanna whispered, inserting her hand into the incubator's opening to gently touch the tiny arm. You're doing so well. As if responding to the touch, Helen moved her head slightly toward Joanna's voice. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but for someone who knew the critical state she had arrived in, it was a wonderful sign of progress. Did you see that? Joanna exclaimed, looking at Anna. She turned her head. The nurse smiled, nodding. She recognizes your voice. You're the person who spends the most time with her. It's natural for her to start responding to your presence. Joanna felt her eyes well up. In such a short time, she had developed a deep bond with this child who was fighting to survive against all odds. A child rejected by her own father, threatened by her aunt's ulterior motives, connected to Joanna only by a promise made to her dying mother. Go get some rest, Anna suggested. noticing the evident exhaustion on Joanna's face. "You haven't slept properly in days. Helen is stable and I'll keep an eye on her." Reluctantly, but recognizing she needed to regain her strength, Joanna agreed. She went to the small room next to the improvised NICU, where a sofa bed had been prepared for the staff's rest periods. As soon as her head hit the pillow, the weight of exhaustion dragged her into a deep, dreamless sleep. Joanna woke up disoriented, unsure of how many hours she had slept. The light filtering through the crack in the curtains suggested it was at least noon. She jumped up, alarmed at having slept so long. Opening the door to her room, she found Regina sitting beside the incubator, making notes on a clipboard. "How long did I sleep?" Joanna asked, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "Almost 12 hours, the doctor replied with a gentle smile. "You needed it. 12 hours!" Joanna exclaimed, horrified. "Why didn't anyone wake me?" "Because you were on the verge of collapse, child. Even Helen seemed worried about you." Joanna quickly approached the incubator. "How is she?" "Surprising everyone, as usual," Regina answered, pride evident in her voice. "Her oxygenation levels continue to improve, and she's already taking a full ounce of milk at each feeding. For a preemie the doctors had given up on, that's extraordinary." Joanna felt tears of relief and gratitude spring to her eyes. "It's thanks to you, doctor. Your methods, your knowledge," Regina shook her head, dismissing the praise. "It's thanks to her willpower. And your love, Joanna. Never underestimate the power of love in the healing process." The doctor paused before adding, "Speaking of love, we had a visitor while you were sleeping." Joanna's heart raced. "Mrs. Carmen?" "No," Regina smiled enigmatically. "The father." Joanna felt the floor drop out from under her. "Mr. Miles was here?" "When, about 2 hours ago. He arrived alone, seemed different." "Different how?" "Like a man who'd been awake all night, fighting with himself," Regina replied, recalling. "He asked to see Helen. He stood by the incubator for almost half an hour, just looking at her. Didn't say a word, didn't ask any questions, just watched." Joanna tried to picture the scene. Richard Miles, the man who had rejected his own daughter at birth, now contemplating her in silence. "And then?" "What happened?" He asked about her treatment. He wanted details about her progress, about my techniques. He showed no judgment when I explained the alternative methods. Just listened intently, asked a few pertinent questions. "Has then—" Regina paused as if carefully choosing her next words. "Then he said thank you. Thanked us for taking care of his daughter when he couldn't. He said he was going to resolve the situation with his sister, that no one would take Helen from us. And before he left this for you." Regina held out an envelope similar to the one Joanna had given Richard the night before. "But this one was open, the wax seal broken. He asked that you read it," Regina explained. "He said that you, more than anyone, deserved to know Louisa's last words." With trembling hands, Joanna took the envelope. Inside was a sheet of elegant stationery, covered in Louisa's delicate handwriting. "My dearest Richard, if you are reading these words, it means my greatest fear has come true. It means I am no longer by your side to watch our daughter grow, to grow old with you, to fulfill all the dreams we planned together. The doctor told me I'm fine, that there's no reason to worry, but something inside me, call it a mother's intuition, if you will, makes me feel I need to leave these words for you just in case. I know you are devastated. I know the pain seems unbearable right now. I know you must be angry, at the world, at God, perhaps even at our daughter. For Richard, my love, I want you to know, our daughter is not responsible for any of this. She is the greatest gift we could ever receive, the most perfect fruit of our love. Do you remember how you used to talk to her through my belly? How your eyes would light up when you felt her first kick? That day we spent hours choosing the perfect name, Helen Light, because she was meant to be the light of our lives. I know it's unfair to ask this of you, especially now when the pain is still so raw, but I need you to be strong, my love. Strong for yourself, strong for her. Don't let the grief erase the wonderful man you are, the father you always dreamed of being. And if, for some reason, you feel unable to care for her right now, there is someone I trust completely, Joanna. I know that to you she is just the housekeeper, but to me she has become a friend, a confidant. During the months of my pregnancy, while you were busy with the company, it was with her that I shared my fears, my hopes, my joy. She promised me that if anything happened to me, She would care for Helen as if she were her own daughter. I know it's an unusual request, perhaps even inappropriate given the social differences between us. But Richard, when it comes to our daughter's life, those differences mean nothing. What matters is love, dedication, commitment. So my last request is this: allow Joanna to care for Helen. Give her the necessary resources. Trust her as I have. And when you are ready, when the pain is no longer so sharp, take your place as her father. Our love was the truest that ever existed. And it lives on in our daughter. Don't let the pain erase that. Don't let her grow up without knowing the extraordinary man who is her father. I will always be with you both, even if you cannot see me. With all my heart, for all eternity, your Louisa. Joanna read the letter a second time, tears streaming freely down her face. Louisa's words, written when she was still alive and full of hope, now seemed like a message from beyond, a final act of love from a mother who would never know her child. She knew, Joanna murmured, gently running her fingers over the paper. Somehow she knew. Regina nodded, her own eyes moist with emotion. Sometimes a mother's heart perceives what the rational mind cannot explain. It's a mystery that medicine has yet to fully decipher. Joanna carefully placed the letter back in the envelope and looked at Helen, who slept peacefully, oblivious to the power of the words that had just been read, words that could completely change her destiny. "Do you think he'll really stop his sister?" she asked, insecurity still present in her voice. Regina smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "The man I saw today was not the same one who rejected this child 2 weeks ago. There was life in his eyes again, determination. And when he looked at Helen," she paused, searching for the right words. "He saw her, Joanna. He truly saw his daughter for the first time." Before Joanna could reply, they heard the sounds of an argument coming from the main house. Raised voices, one of them unmistakably Carmen Miles's, the other, to Joanna's surprise, was Richard's. "What's happening?" Joanna asked, alarmed. Regina stood up, her expression serious. "Stay with Helen, I'll see what's going on." But before the doctor could leave, the door flew open violently. Carmen stormed in like a hurricane, followed by a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. Behind them, Richard was trying to restrain his sister. "Carmen, I already told you, you're not taking Helen anywhere," he exclaimed, his voice filled with authority. Carmen spun around, facing her brother with fury. "You're not thinking clearly, Richard. You're letting your daughter be treated by an unlicensed doctor and an unqualified maid when she could be in the best private clinic in New York." "My daughter is alive thanks to these 2 women you're insulting," Richard retorted, each word laced with controlled coldness. "The doctors at Mount Sinai said she wouldn't survive. They gave her a 2% chance. And look at her now." Carmen laughed with disdain. "Oh, please. You rejected this child the moment she was born. You said you didn't even want to look at her. And now you want to play the devoted father? What changed, Richard? Was it the reminder that she's your sole heir?" Richard's face hardened, but he maintained his composure. "What changed, Carmen, is that I finally listened to my wife's words. Words you would never understand, because you've never known what it's like to love someone more than yourself." Carmen took a step forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. While you were drowning in self-pity, I was protecting the family's interests, keeping the business running." "Dealing with the press?" "No," Richard corrected, his voice now dangerously calm. "You were positioning yourself to take control, as you always do, and now you want to use my daughter as a pawn in your power games." The man in the suit, who had been watching the argument in silence, cleared his throat to get their attention. "Mr. Miles, I have here a preliminary court order authorizing Mrs. Carmen Miles to assume temporary custody of the minor, pending an evaluation of your psychological fitness to exercise paternity." Richard smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting, because I just spoke with Judge Alden, an old family friend, and he assured me that no judge in New York would sign such an order without a prior hearing. So I wonder, what document is that you're holding?" The lawyer visibly paled, exchanging nervous glances with Carmen. "It's a petition that will be reviewed by the judge. A formal request. In other words, it's worthless paper," Richard concluded. Then, addressing his sister with a frightening calm, he added, "You have 10 minutes to get out of my house, and if you ever try to use my daughter in your power games again, I will personally ensure you never set foot in any social or business circle in this city again." Are we clear? Carmen held her chin high, but the tremor in her lips betrayed that she knew she had lost the battle. You'll regret this, Richard, she said finally, adjusting her bag on her shoulder with forced dignity. When you realize you have no idea how to raise a child, especially one with the special needs this one, you'll be begging for my help. I highly doubt it, Richard replied dryly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a daughter to get to know. Carmen shot one last furious glare at Joanna before leaving, followed by the embarrassed lawyer. The silence that followed their departure was almost palpable. Finally, Richard turned to the incubator where Helen slept, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded around her. He approached slowly, as if afraid to wake her. She's so small, he murmured, more to himself than to the others in the room. So fragile. But much stronger than she looks, Joanna replied softly, stopping beside him. Just like her mother. Richard looked at Joanna, his eyes revealing a complex mix of emotions: gratitude, regret, sadness, hope. Louisa's letter, he began. She was right about everything. About you, about my reaction, about what's truly important. Joanna didn't know what to say. Words seemed inadequate in the face of the transformation she was witnessing. You saved my daughter when I abandoned her, Richard continued. You risked your job, your reputation, everything, for a child that not even I, her father, wanted to protect. He paused, gathering courage for his next words. I can never make up for what I did, or thank you enough for what you've done. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try. How? Joanna asked, her voice barely a whisper. By honoring Louisa's wish. I want you to continue caring for Helen. Not as a housekeeper, but as her official guardian. I'll have all the papers drawn up. You'll have your own apartment in the mansion, all the necessary provisions. And Dr. Scott will continue to supervise her treatment, with all the resources she needs. Joanna looked at Regina, who was watching the scene with an emotional smile, and then at Helen. The baby who 2 weeks ago was fighting for her life now slept peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in an ever-stronger rhythm. I don't know what to say, Joanna admitted. Richard hesitantly reached out and touched Helen's arm through the incubator's opening. The baby stirred slightly, reacting to her father's touch. Something in that small gesture seemed to crumble the last barriers around the man's heart. A single tear ran down Richard's face, the first since Louisa's death. Say you'll help us start over, he asked, his voice choked with emotion. Me and my daughter. Joanna looked at the impossible scene. The powerful Richard Miles moved to tears by the touch of the daughter he had rejected, begging for the help of a housekeeper from Biloxi. If someone had told her this story 2 weeks ago, she would have laughed at the improbability. But now, witnessing the transformative power of love, a mother's love for her daughter, a father's reawakened love, and the unconditional love she herself felt for this tiny creature, Joanna knew what her answer would be. I'll help you, she said simply, sealing with those words a future none of them could have foreseen. And as the afternoon sun filtered through the cracks in the curtains, illuminating little Helen with a golden glow, 3 adults marked by pain and hope contemplated the miracle of life that had survived against all odds, a life that, unbeknownst to them yet, would forever change each of their destinies. Chapter 4. Rebirths. The months that followed transformed the Miles mansion in ways no one could have predicted. The oppressive silence that once dominated the hallways gave way to the sounds of renovations and change. Richard, driven by a renewed energy, ordered the entire house to be redesigned to welcome his daughter. The former master suite, where Louisa had suffered that tragic night, was completely renovated and transformed into a nursery worthy of a fairy tale. The ceiling was painted with a starry sky that glowed softly in the dark, exactly as Louisa had dreamed for her daughter. As Joanna had revealed to Richard, during one of the many conversations they began to have about the woman they had both loved, each in their own way. She wanted Helen to be able to see the stars even on cloudy nights, Joanna recounted as they watched the painters at work on the ceiling. She said that way the girl would always know there is light, even in the darkest moments. Richard nodded, swallowing the lump that formed in his throat. Each new revelation about Louisa's dreams and plans for their daughter was both a precious and painful gift. The guest wing, which had served as a makeshift NICU, was transformed into a complete apartment for Joanna, with a living room, bedroom, office, and even a small sunroom. She protested at first, saying it was too much, but Richard was adamant. "You're not a housekeeper anymore, Joanna. You are Helen's official guardian, a fundamental part of her life, and of mine." The last words were always accompanied by a look that Joanna still didn't know how to interpret, or perhaps feared to interpret correctly. Helen, for her part, surpassed all medical expectations. At 3 months old, she had already doubled her weight, and although still smaller than full-term babies, she showed surprising vitality. Her blue eyes, identical to her mother's, observed the world with a curiosity that enchanted everyone. Dr. Regina Scott, who had initially planned to stay only until the child was stable, eventually accepted Richard's invitation to remain as the family's personal physician. An entire floor of the mansion was converted into a clinic and research center, where she could continue her studies on alternative neonatal treatments. Now, with all the resources previously denied to her by the conventional system, imagine how many children we can help, she told Joanna, showing her the new laboratory. Babies who, like Helen, would have been considered lost causes by traditional medicine. Carmen Miles, after the humiliating confrontation, temporarily disappeared from New York's social map. Rumors said she was in Europe, handling the family's international business. The truth, as Richard confided to Joanna, was far less glamorous. "She's at a wellness retreat in Switzerland. The doctor said it was a nervous breakdown, but I think it's just the result of years of living under self-imposed pressure. Maybe this time away will make her rethink her priorities." Carmen's absence, however, did not mean complete peace. The press, always hungry for stories involving the rich and powerful, began to speculate about Richard Miles's sudden seclusion, the mysterious death of his wife, and the rumors of a baby few had seen. The tycoon and the nanny. Richard laughed bitterly, tossing a gossip magazine onto the table during breakfast, 6 months after that fateful night. Apparently, we're now New York's new scandalous romance. Joanna blushed intensely at the cover photo, she and Richard, captured by some telephoto lens, walking together in the mansion's garden. Helen was in Joanna's arms, and Richard was looking at them both with an expression that, even in a stolen photo, was undeniably affectionate. "I'm sorry about this," she murmured, unable to look at him. "Maybe it would be better if I stayed more—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Richard interrupted, his voice suddenly serious. "You have nothing to be sorry for. They're the ones who should be ashamed, inventing stories to sell magazines." Joanna nodded, but she knew the situation was more complex. In recent months, the relationship between her and Richard had evolved in an unexpected way. What had begun as an unlikely alliance for Helen's sake had blossomed into a genuine friendship. They would talk for hours after putting the baby to sleep, sharing memories of Louisa, stories of their own lives, dreams for the future. Richard listened with genuine interest about Joanna's childhood in rural Mississippi, the hardships she had faced, the sick mother she had left in an aunt's care to find work in New York. "You're extraordinary, you know that?" he said one night, as they shared a bottle of wine on the veranda. "Most people would have given up in the face of so many obstacles. But you fight, just like you fought for Helen." The comment caught her off guard, making her look away, embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same. "No, Joanna. Not anyone would have challenged one of the most powerful men in New York to save a child that wasn't even theirs. Not anyone would have risked everything for a promise." And then, in a gesture that surprised her even more, Richard covered her hand with his, a delicate touch that sent shivers through her entire body. "You've transformed my life. You brought light back when I thought I would be in darkness forever." Joanna gently withdrew her hand, confused and frightened by her own feelings. How could she explain to Richard that, despite everything, she felt like an imposter, that no matter how much time passed, in the eyes of the world she would always be the maid who dared to dream too big? "Helen needs to go to bed early tomorrow," she said, standing up abruptly. "We have an appointment with Dr. Scott first thing in the morning." Richard didn't press, respecting her retreat. But the look he gave Joanna as she walked away clearly said that the conversation was only postponed, not over. The next morning, during Helen's checkup, Dr. Scott made an announcement that took Joanna and Richard by surprise. "Officially, I can say that Helen is out of any risk zone," the doctor declared with a proud smile, examining the 7-month-old baby. "Her neuromotor development is within the expected parameters. Her lungs are functioning perfectly and her weight gain is consistent. She is, for all intents and purposes, a medical miracle. Joanna felt tears of joy fill her eyes. She picked Helen up and hugged her gently, feeling the vigorous little body squirm in her arms, so different from the fragile being who had struggled to breathe months ago. "Thank you, Doctor." "For everything." Regina smiled, putting away her instruments. "Don't thank me. I just offered knowledge and guidance. You two," she looked meaningfully at Joanna and Richard, "were the ones who truly saved this child, with love, dedication, and an impressive stubbornness." Richard laughed, reaching out to take his daughter. Helen immediately smiled at her father, extending her little hands to touch his face. "Dada," she babbled for the first time. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Richard looked at his daughter with teary eyes, unable to believe what he had just heard. She said, "Yes," Joanna confirmed, equally emotional. "She said Dada." Helen repeated the sound, now clapping her hands, delighted with the reaction she had caused. Richard hugged her to his chest, allowing himself to cry openly for the first time since Louisa's death. "Thank you," he whispered, looking at Joanna over his daughter's head. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Regina, sensing the intensity of the moment, discreetly withdrew, leaving the small family in their bubble of happiness. That night, after putting Helen to sleep, Joanna found Richard in the sunroom. He was sitting alone, contemplating the starry sky through the glass ceiling. When she approached, he smiled, indicating the spot beside him. "Is she asleep?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Like an angel," Joanna confirmed, sitting down. It was an exciting day for her. For all of us. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Richard turned to face her directly. "Joanna, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been feeling for a while, but I didn't know how to express." She felt her heart race, a mix of fear and hope stirring in her chest. "Richard, please let me finish," he asked gently. "If I don't say it now, I might never find the courage again." He took a deep breath before continuing. "When I lost Louisa, I thought I would never be able to feel anything but pain again. I rejected our daughter. I shut myself away in my own bitterness. I had given up, Joanna, completely." He paused as if searching for the right words. "Then you came along, with your fierce determination, your unwavering compassion. You fought for my daughter when I wouldn't. You kept Louisa's memory alive in a way that honored who she was. And without me realizing it, you began to heal something in me that I thought was beyond repair." Joanna felt tears stream freely down her face, unable to hold them back. "I know it's soon," Richard continued. "I know the world out there might not understand. I know people will talk, judge, speculate. But the truth, Joanna, is that I found something in you that I never thought I'd find again. Hope. And more than that, love." The word hung between them like a precious and frightening jewel. "What I'm trying to say, probably in the worst way possible," he smiled nervously, "is that I'm in love with you. Not as a man looking to replace what he lost, but as someone who has found something new and equally precious. Something I may not deserve, but that I want with all my heart." Joanna closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. For months she had fought against her own feelings, convinced they were inappropriate, impossible, that the social chasm between them was too wide, that Louisa's shadow would always be between them, that the world would never accept it. But now, hearing Richard speak with such honesty, such vulnerability, she realized that perhaps those barriers existed only in her mind. "I feel something for you too," she finally admitted, opening her eyes to meet his. "Something I've never felt before. But I'm scared, Richard. Scared of what people will say, of how it will affect Helen, of not being enough." He took her hands in his, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You are more than enough, Joanna. You are extraordinary. And as for the rest, we'll face it together one day at a time. What matters is that Helen has two adults who love her unconditionally and who love each other the same way." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm just opening my heart, showing you how I feel. The time and the pace are yours to set. They always will be." Joanna nodded, deeply touched by his respect and consideration. This was not how she had imagined a man like Richard Miles would act. Once again he surprised her, showing the person who existed beyond the facade of the ruthless businessman. "Thank you," she said simply. "For trusting me enough to share this," Richard smiled, a smile full of hope and possibilities, always. Spring had arrived in New York, bringing with it an explosion of colors and scents to the mansion's garden. Helen, now just over a year old, was taking her first unsteady steps across the grass, under the watchful eyes of Joanna and Richard. Her dark curls, inherited from her father, bounced in the gentle breeze, and her blue eyes, exact replicas of her mother's, shone with joy as she discovered the world. "Look, she's trying to catch a butterfly," Joanna exclaimed, laughing as she saw the little girl stretching her arms up high. Richard watched the scene with a serene smile. In the last few months, the transformation in his life had been complete. The once cold and silent house now overflowed with life. The business, which he had neglected after Louisa's death, was thriving under a new philosophy. Richard reduced his work hours, delegated responsibilities, and redirected part of the company's profits to a foundation in Louisa's name, dedicated to research in maternal and infant health, with Dr. Scott as its scientific director. Amen. After 6 months at the Swiss retreat, returned transformed. The experience of nearly losing everything, including her sanity, seemed to have made her re-evaluate her priorities. To everyone's surprise, especially Richard's, she apologized and offered to help with the foundation, using her talents in public relations for a cause that truly mattered. The relationship between the siblings, though still cautious, was beginning to rebuild on healthier foundations. The press, always eager for news, eventually lost interest in the tycoon and the nanny story when juicier scandals emerged. The growing relationship between Richard and Joanna evolved at its own pace, away from the spotlight, built on mutual respect, admiration, and a love that grew naturally with each passing day. On that special Sunday afternoon, as Helen explored the garden, Richard approached Joanna, discreetly holding a small velvet box. "I have something for you," he said, sounding strangely nervous. Joanna looked curiously at the box, her heart racing. "What is it?" Instead of answering, Richard opened the box, revealing not a ring, as Joanna had secretly feared and hoped, but a delicate gold necklace with a star-shaped pendant studded with tiny diamonds. "It was Louisa's," he explained softly. "She wore it on special occasions. She used to say the stars remind us that even in the darkest moments, the light is never completely gone." Joanna touched the pendant with trembling fingers, moved by the meaning of the gesture. "Richard, I can't accept this. It's too personal to—" "She would have wanted you to have it," he interrupted gently. "I'm sure of it. You brought light back into our lives, Joanna. Mine and Helen's." He took the necklace from the box and gestured for Joanna to turn around. With delicate hands, he placed the jewelry around her neck, fastening the clasp. When she turned back to face him, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Richard gently touched the pendant, now resting on Joanna's chest, and then, in a fluid motion, he leaned in and kissed her for the first time. It was a soft, almost reverent kiss, full of unspoken promises. When they parted, they were both smiling, aware that they had crossed an important threshold. A happy shriek interrupted the moment. Helen had finally managed to get close to a butterfly perched on a low flower, and was watching, fascinated, the colorful insect. "Look, Mama!" "Look, Dada!" she exclaimed in her still-developing language, pointing excitedly. The words hit Joanna like a bolt of lightning. It was the first time Helen had called her Mama. Until then, the girl had only called her by her name, with Joanna carefully avoiding assuming a title she didn't feel was hers by right. "She called me." Joanna couldn't finish the sentence, emotion choking her throat. Richard put his arm around her shoulders, kissing her temple softly. "She knows who you are, Joanna. She always has." Joanna knelt on the grass, opening her arms to Helen, who ran clumsily toward her, tumbling into the arms of the woman who had fought for her life from the very first moment. "Yes, my love," Joanna whispered, hugging the little girl with all the love in the world. "Mama's here. Mama will always be here." Richard joined them, embracing the two women who had rebuilt his world. Together they formed a family that had defied all odds, a family built not on blood or social conventions, but on the purest and most powerful of bonds, unconditional love. and as the sun began to set on the New York horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, three hearts beat in unison, united by a journey that had begun in the deepest pain and culminated in the most unexpected of joys. A journey that reminded them all that life in its mysterious wisdom sometimes leads us down the most tortuous paths only to show us that true happiness can arise in the most unlikely places and moments. In the garden of that mansion, now overflowing with life and love, Helen played, protected by the watchful gaze of her parents, the man who had learned to love again and the woman who had never given up on a promise. And somewhere, perhaps in the stars that would soon begin to dot the night sky, Louisa Miles smiled, knowing that her last wish had been fulfilled in the most perfect way possible.